Hello, good evening, and welcome back to another episode of Minds on Guard, where we are learning how to guard our minds against all of the manipulations of the 21st century media landscape and all of the ways that we come under attack from the media, from the people and entities that control the media, and all of the interconnected, outcropping institutions that make up the 21st century reality that we live in here in America and indeed the world. We return tonight to the subject of the American education system. When we think about keeping our minds on guard, we need to consider the ways in which our minds develop from the earliest ages right up into our day-to-day learning with respect to how we interact with the information inherent to our individual environment. Each person has their own contextual frame that is connected to both smaller and larger frames, which form the whole of what we experience as reality. It is this individual experience that shapes a person's thoughts and their behaviors. The more accurately a person can contextualize themselves and their experience within the frame of objective reality, the better off they will be when it comes to both understanding and parsing out truth in a chaotic world that has been corrupted in ways that deceive and distract our more rational and sober cognitive abilities. Now, there's much to say on this topic, and I will once again direct the viewers of this channel to the Phronstisterium Substack for a more detailed and nuanced discussion of the nature of reality and how we understand it. For this video, we're going to pick up where we left off last week by discussing some of the underlying methodology of modern education in America. In our last video, we spent some time with the work of Professor Thomas Sowell, who has done a great deal of deep and rigorous work and research into the problems that plague the current American public school system. Sowell explores the deterioration of America's education system from what was once a highly respected institution, which yielded a society that led the world in innovation and economic prosperity, only to wind up in a state of disarray, both in terms of our rankings in general intelligence, and also with respect to our hegemonic standing amongst the most developed nations around the globe. While there are many factors that contribute to this decline, the one we're going to focus on for this video pertains to the psychological conditioning that has been present in the public school curriculum for multiple decades. Sowell writes, "Much has been said about how our young people do not meet the academic standards of their peers in other countries with which we compete economically. While this is both true and important, their academic deficiencies are only half the story. All across this country, the school curriculum has been invaded by psychological conditioning programs, which not only take up time sorely needed for intellectual development, but also promote an emotionalized and anti-intellectual way of responding to the challenges facing every individual and every society. Worst of all, the psychotherapeutic curriculum systematically undermines the parent-child relationship and the shared values which make a society possible." To understand where we are, we can look back in history to get a sense for how and when things shifted. The decline of American schooling did not happen overnight, and it also was not without its directed influence from specific men who shared certain philosophies and agendas. We have looked at the work of Wilhelm Wundt and John Dewey, and for those who are just joining us on this channel for this video, please go back and watch that material, as it will help clarify some of the things in this video. I have linked them in the description. The Leipzig Lab and Wundt's protégés and those who subscribed to his ideas of experimental psychology would have lasting impact on the generations of future Americans. One such student turned influencer is a man named Edward Thorndike. Born in Williamsburg, Massachusetts, Thorndike would attend Harvard after graduating from Wesleyan University in 1895, eventually earning a master's degree from Harvard. He was a student of William James, once called the father of American psychology, and developed a keen interest in the field of human behavior. Thorndike believed that, quote, psychology was the science of the intellect, character, and behavior of animals, including man. Now, this equating of animals and humans is familiar to us, as it's a similar theme that we've been examining in the various experimental psychologists, and is yet another example of the more naturalistic worldviews that have permeated throughout the institutions of our country, since at least the mid-1800s, if not before, in certain ways. What this leads us to is the devaluing and disregarding of any distinction between humans and animals, and, in essence, a decoupling of the soul from the human experience. According to experimental psychologists like Thorndike, the sum total of any person's behavior is ultimately shaped by the stimulus of their environment and not the inner workings of their mind and choices based on moral laws and systems that are inherent to reality. After leaving Harvard, Thorndike went on to pursue his PhD at Columbia University and would eventually gain a position on the faculty at the then recently Rockefeller-endowed Teachers College, Columbia, giving him an institutional connection to Mr. John Dewey. While at Teachers College, Thorndike began his more earnest experimentation and research. He was the first psychologist to study animal behavior in an experimental psychology laboratory, and then use what he found to apply the same kinds of experimentation to children in an educational setting. He believed that humans are essentially animals, and as such, our actions are really only reactions. He would carry this assumption and wind up considering children much in the same way that one might think of a rat or a chicken in a laboratory setting. Through his research, he developed what he called laws of animal behavior and then applied these to the instruction and training of teachers. This training methodology that he developed was to be widely used throughout the U.S., and teachers would then apply these behavioral laws in the ways that they ran their classrooms and in the development of their curricula, all on the basis of this appeal to the authority of the new educational psychology coming out of Teachers College. In his book, The Principles of Teaching Based on Psychology, Thorndike gives his definition of how teaching should be done. Quote, "The art of giving and withholding stimuli with the result of producing or preventing certain responses. In this definition, the term stimulus is used widely for any event which influences a person. For a word spoken to him, a look, a sentence which he reads, the air he breathes, etc., etc. The term response is used for any reaction made by him, a new thought, a feeling of interest, a bodily act, any mental or bodily condition resulting from the stimulus. The aim of the teacher is to produce desirable and prevent undesirable changes in human beings by producing and preventing certain responses. The means at the disposal of the teacher are the stimuli which can be brought to bear upon the pupil. The teacher's words, gestures, and appearance, the condition and appliances of the schoolroom, the books to be used and objects to be seen, and so on through a long list of the things and events which the teacher can control." These ideas regarding the stimulus-response method of teaching would be what men like B.F. Skinner would use to develop his concepts of operant conditioning, which we will explore in later videos. Thorndike's ideas on conditioning were based on what he called the law of effect. Now, this essentially states that actions or behaviors which lead to satisfaction within the child would be stamped into the child's behavior patterns, and then those which lead to unsatisfactory results would be stamped out or avoided. This leads to the conclusion that the only way to strengthen a child's good responses, subjectively good responses, is to reinforce the behavior that is desired. Likewise, to eliminate the child's subjectively bad responses would be to deny the behavior. The problem with this is that it requires the teacher to manipulate children if they happen to decide the subject being taught is not pleasurable and thus rewarding, or else the child will never learn it. This kind of thinking generates a society which operates primarily based on gratification as opposed to reason and responsibility. When children have been trained to equate that which is pleasurable to that which is good and that which is bad with things that cause any amount of discomfort or pain, that becomes their main filter through which they process reality. We carry this into our lives, and if this kind of programming is used on enough of the youth of a country, the results are a weak-willed, hedonistic, and irresponsible generation who only seek after their own selfish desires for pleasure. My question for the viewers here is, do you see anything like this in your day-to-day interactions with people in the world? Do you see any of this programming present in your own thinking? Please comment below about what you recognize. There is far more to look at with respect to Edward Throndike and his influence on education. His views on social organization would lead to some seriously disturbing conclusions that will connect some of the previous material that we've discussed on this channel. For now, what we see is that Professor Sowell has a point, and a valid one, when discussing the relationship to the decline in American education and the implementation of the psychological conditioning programs that were developed by the likes of Thorndike, Skinner, and others who believed that children are nothing more than lab rats to be experimented on and then controlled in order to achieve a desirable end. Again, that word desirable is subjective to the ones controlling the operant conditioning, the psychological conditioning programs, the ones developing it. The agenda of control has been carried out for decades now, and the theories of the experimental psychologists were used by those who sought to direct society to serve certain interests. By training children to only respond to stimulus, the schools have effectively shut off our higher capacities for reasoning and using logic to understand reality. For those of us who've been through these conditioning programs, the work now must be focused on developing the skills that we should have been taught in our childhood. This is a difficult task when approached as an adult, but the difficulty will yield great things. I say this as a word of encouragement to those who are going through the relearning process. You are not alone, and I am in the fight as well. We need not have the reaction of pain when difficult things are put to us. Learning to do hard things is its own reward. The effort is the good, and the striving to do better is the thing that will ultimately benefit others through taking on the responsibility to live and think well. We will pick back up with Thorndike and continue this exploration of the decline of American education next week. And until then, stay safe, check in on your loved ones, and stay diligent and vigilant with your minds on guard.